back in studio. My name is Hank Balch with Beyond Clean. We're with Kurt.audette, our Beyond Clean Rigid Endoscope Expert for 2024. And Kurt, you're blazing a trail of knowledge around these scopes already so far. We're just 3 episodes in. This has been awesome. Welcome back to the studio.
Glad to be here. Thanks again, Hank.
And so, we talked a lot about identification last time. And the conversation was around, what you could see and understand about the scope by looking on the outside of the scope. We talked about the colored rings. We talked about kind of decoding the product numbers. Today, we're going to move the conversation from the outside of the scope, maybe more to the inside of the scope, and talk about the optics piece. And it's a complicated device. It may not look like it from the outside, but there's a lot going on inside these little metal telescopes that we're handling every day. What's the best place to start to begin diving in here?
Wow, what a great transition. I don't know if I could follow that one, Hank. That was awesome. Thank you. Yeah, so the biggest question I get, you and I were talking about this, I know a few weeks ago, and customers say, how can I prevent these things from breaking? So the goal for this session is just to help our customers and clinical staff understand what's going on inside. And maybe there's a clinician that'll pick something up along the way. But in general, there are 3 types of glass that are utilized. One is the rod lens, which we already spoke about, which is a solid piece of glass. Even though it's broken up into segments, it's a solid piece of glass. Then we have what's called the semi-rigid image bundle, which is used in our semi-rigid scopes, of course. That's a little bit different. Think of pieces of pasta. My Northeast accent might come out there. But think of pieces of pasta that would represent a pixel of glass. That's something that we would utilize in a semi-rigid telescope. And then imagine the same pasta used for illumination fibers. But the difference between the image bundle and the illumination fibers is that image bundle fibers are arranged strategically. Illumination are not. So let me give you a visual example of that. So we've got our rod lenses here. Again, these are rod lenses. They are strategically placed. If you saw session 1, strategically placed to develop that prescription that we're looking for. If we look through the eyepiece of a telescope or endoscope, I'm not sure what Hank's preference is, but we'll figure that one out by the end of the session. We're going to see a solid, clear, pixel-free image on the screen, whether it's through the telescope or on a monitor. Now, depending on the application, our telescopes, larger diameter for laparoscopy, smaller diameter, for sinus, urology, still solid lenses, but maybe we want to use something that's a little bit more flexible, but not truly flexible, which is a semi-rigid. Well, we can't bend rod lenses. Sure, we could, but then they're broken and we're going to be sending them in for repair. Spacers help with that, but what if we could use an image bundle like this? And I know this is a crazy visual, but imagine that each one of these circular patterns that you see on the screen represents a pixel of glass. And each one of those pieces of glass has to be manufactured with heat. So we're drawing optical fibers. This is what we talk about, or what we talked about in session 1. Where you see these black dots, those are actually broken pieces of glass. And we can't replace them. We'd have to remove the entire bundle to replace them. But with this particular configuration, we can go in different places of the body that we may not be able to get into with a rigid endoscope. So that's why we have a semi-rigid telescope instead. A little bit more flexibility to get into the ureter or maybe into the UO or the bladder. But you can only bend it so far. And then the question becomes, how far can I bend it? And, I'm not going to throw a protractor on there, but you'll know because you'll hear the, and that'll be the end of the day.
Yeah.
And then you'll be calling your rep. And
that was too far.
Exactly. We've all done it. But so this is what we would call an image bundle or a fiber optic image bundle. So just like our rigid endoscopes with rod lenses, those rod lenses carry light and color information. With our semi-rigid, same thing with the image bundle, they carry light and color information. The major difference between an optical bundle or an image fiber optic bundle and an illumination bundle is when I place this pixel at 6 o'clock at the proximal side, which would be here, then it has to align distally at 6 o'clock here as well. Same thing, 12 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 3 o'clock. that develops what's called a coherent image bundle. And you can look that up online. It's an actual term. I'm not making it up, I promise. That is a term you'll hear. It's synonymous with image bundles or fiber optic image bundles. If we move on to an illumination bundle, which is this, or those LED Christmas trees that we see from time to time, the illumination bundle is not, in most manufacturers' world for human medicine, it's not a hand placed um, component. I know with image bundles, it is a hand placed component for some manufacturers. It's a laborious process, but it can only be done by a human. But when we talk about illumination, it doesn't require a strategic placement because it's only carrying light. So then the question becomes, how many broken light fibers can I have? And I've heard anywhere from 50% to 30% to 20%. And my recommendation is always the clinical staff will let you know. And I say that with
Right.
all due respect because I could say 30%, but depending on the application, it depends on where it's used. If it's in the bladder, 30% might be, too much. But in a laparoscopic cavity, maybe, maybe not. So it's all up to the user.
Is there no, like, I guess what you're saying is there's no industry guideline around that, number one, for quality inspection purposes for these light bundles. And there may or may not be any information from the IFUs.
What a great question. So as a manufacturer, there are specifications. So we do have as a part of our design work requirements. So during clinical trials and working with KOLs to determine what's acceptable light. So we'll work with those KOLs and we'll say, does this work? And then we'll develop a standard. From there, then we can, and it's not across the board. It's different for each application, as you can imagine. Um, some of the equipment that's used to measure it, it's done in a controlled environment. So it's really difficult to put that into a reprocessing group, sterile processing or CSPD, whichever group, whatever your acronym is, where you are. And it's a question that comes up all the time. How do I know when a light cable is bad? In general, it's usually we hear 30%. I'm not going to say that's the end all be all. I'm just going to say, and there are different techniques. I've seen eye loops used, throw light up against the wall and you can see the difference. But at the end of the day, we're trying to work with our physicians to figure out, does this work? But again, in SPD, we're trying to give them the best product and reduce risk in the clinical application.
I got one more kind of rapid fire here before we wrap, and it's the kind of the question of burnout or maybe like the bundle damage. So, like, you gave a great explanation on the differences between these two things, the optical and then this other one with the luminescence one. Yeah. Are they both as sensitive as each other? Like, can one break easier than the other, or like we talking about basically the same stuff, but they're just designed to do different things?
Oh, Hank, you did your homework. Awesome questions. The short answer is there are differences. So depending on, and I know we have a flexible flexible scope expert on the team, but I can tell you this, from a manufacturing perspective, depending on the size of the flexible scope, the image bundle pixels are different sizes. So a smaller diameter might be more susceptible to damage. Light cables in general that carry illumination fibers, the diameter stays pretty consistent. So if we were doing a comparison between flexible scopes, yes, there's a difference. If we were doing it between light cables and flexible scope image bundles, there's probably a difference there too. But amongst illumination fibers, it's probably consistent across the board. Within reason, I'm making a general statement.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Well, if anyone has any further questions on that, I know we just kind of scratched the surface for the detailed questions we can go into on this topic, but we're going to have Kurt's contact info in the write-up, in the show notes description, wherever you see this video out there in the World Wide Web. And we're going to wrap here, though, but hey, we ain't done, not even close with this series. We've got a lot more great content coming. Specifically on the next episode, we're going to start diving into the pre-cleaning conversations and debates and opportunities and gaps and best practices around this topic of rigid and semi-rigid scopes. So hang with us. Make sure to subscribe if you're not already. And as we say each and every week here at Beyond Clean, until we see you again, keep fighting dirty.